The world is different now than what it was in the 80s and the 90s, and even in the early 2000s, where one design fits all regions. You have to build a strategy that allows regional or local adaptations. But there's also a big need for decentralization, empowerment, and localization of talent, of designs, of production, of supply chain, you name it.
Let's take that one step forward into another section that I wanted to talk to you about today was building leadership for centers like these to really be successful. We see so many examples on both sides of the spectrum. The ones that are hugely successful, they go on to build, these centers which are in tens of thousands of people and are doing really, really critical job. But you also see examples where there are, failed experiments. And I feel that there's a lot to do with the type of leader one gets in. But just before we go into, let's say, what makes a leader successful in a GCC type of environment, just broadly, leadership as a topic, Astrid, you would be interacting with tons and tons of global leaders. In the current global business environment, what do you think are the most important factors that a leader must demonstrate, possess, actively advocate for? What's in your definition is a good leader today in the current environment?
Well, I think historically and now as well, getting results through others is of importance, right? Of great importance. The outcomes of a business. But yeah, is what people are looking at. Can this leader get results through others by doing certain things, right? Being strategic, setting a vision, setting an end game, being agile enough to change, make decisions where you have a new set of criterias to deal with. Today's leaders also need to be very good at stakeholder management. You have stakeholders from all around the world to deal with, internal and external stakeholders. And how you deal with them may need to differ because there are cultural differences. You have to
Yeah,
be culturally sensitive to
yeah,
understand how you deal with somebody across the oceans, right? And
yeah,
there is no cookie cutter approach to this. You have to adapt in the way you interact with people. Talent is a big thing in my book, because you never want to make a business dependent on a person. When
mm,
that person
mm,
is no longer there, is the business sustainably positioned to survive in such a hyper competitive environment? So, constantly thinking about succession planning, developing people, and being intentional about that. You can't ignore that fact. And and then if you just put the bow around this whole package, it's how you lead. A leadership through hope and positive energy and empathy goes far ahead of leadership
yeah,
through fear.
yeah.
That is old school, and that doesn't work in this new world anymore. You have to practice this cultural sensitivity, understand, listen, learn, be inquisitive. And I think the cards can fall in the right place.
A question that we often receive when somebody is, let's say, looking at setting up structures like these, how do you like make a decision? And I'm going slightly towards, let's say, now more on the competency centers or capability centers as an example. So one level below just the broader definition of leadership that you so brilliantly articulated, Astrid, is decision between should I go for a administrative and competencies that are required for one to run the governance, compliance, operations, etc., as a set of competencies that are needed versus one is able to think about building a P&L or let's say product development, or for that matter, driving technology centers or driving R&D centers. How does one make a choice between the two? What's a good transition? How should the parent organization, the leadership in the parent organization be thinking about it?
Capability and competency in my book means breadth and depth. The
Mm,
talent pool is there. You can do both. It's a decision a leader needs to make. The easy way is to do tactical work and
mm,
throw it into a GCC and say
mm,
repetitive work, right? Do it, pick up phones and do, I don't know, complaints management with customers or what have you, right?
right,
Or you really tap into the talent and you leverage the competencies. I
right,
lean more into leveraging the competencies than just doing the capabilities. The capabilities is also a great value proposition to a company. It's more affordable, you can scale it, you can expand it and flex it as the markets require you to, but the opportunity is to do much bigger things and leverage the depth. And the
right,
depth comes with this incredible capability that is being produced in India. Over 1 million engineers as an example, 10 million graduates a year. You can go
right,
beyond just the tactical, repetitive type of work. You can go far beyond that. But when you make that decision, you have to integrate and you have to communicate and you have to be on the ground on a regular basis to kind of nurture and foster
right,
these talents and this development.
right.
And plus, India is so well positioned because 3.5 billion people live in that side of the world, 4 billion even, and that's where the growth is going to come from over the next decade. And
Mm,
you don't want to be in the wrong side of the planet in order to take advantage of the growth aspect. India has made a commitment to 7-8% growth every single year. In
right.
order to take advantage of that, you got to be on the ground.
Astrid, you've very, very beautifully articulated the top layer, which is, let's say, leadership competency, the breadth that is required for one to operate irrespective of geographies, regardless of where the parent organization is. But one of the questions that we bump into all the time is, especially when organizations are considering setting up centers, do I get a leader who's super good at compliance, administration, putting a team together, setting up the center versus a true business leader? And the true business leader could be like driving P&L, driving product development, driving technology, centers or innovation centers. How does one evaluate, one or the other, or is it more a transition from one to the other? So again, the same question that if there's a leader who is thinking about setting up operations here, how would you recommend he or she?
I think it can be transitional. You can get started by seeing the value. It brings value to your business. It brings a benefit to your P&L and get started. Get started even with some more transactional type of work. But there is a transition where you can tap in to the depths of the talent, not
Right.
just the breadth of the talent. You can do engineering work, you can do research, you can do, besides compliance and customer service or those kinds of activities, you can do far more. And I would encourage, once you make that step, don't limit yourself just to the more transactional type of work. The capability exists there. You just need to be intentional about developing this talent, just like you develop talent in any other region of the world to become a P&L leader. It should be done everywhere. So back to your question, take the leap of faith.
Hmm.
Get started. Get started. Go in, support the team, build this capability, and have competence in mind as well as you expand it.
Right.
Leverage the scale that you can create from a GCC that puts you in a competitive advantage compared to other players in the world. And it gives you the necessary ingredients to make your strategy,
Yeah.
work faster and better and become nimbler as an organization.
Yeah.
I would I I would do it again if I had the opportunity. No questions asked. I was so impressed with the journey we've been on. Was it hard in
Yeah.
the beginning? Yes, because we chose to go into the competency, deep competencies of designing products. But you can
Yeah.
start with more transactional activities and then transition to the deeper competencies.
Yeah, though I've had the opportunity to visit the center a few times, and it's amazing how well the whole thing is integrated. So there is uh, engineering work that's going on. The whole customer experience center is deeply embedded as a part of the office real estate. So I'm sure every time there is a customer visit, that experience center comes into play. But what is even more impressive is the world-class test beds and test facility that one has built. It's a remarkably well integrated setup that your team, I'm sure the leaders in India, they've designed over a period of time, and yeah, it's quite fascinating. It's one of the best centers that I've seen in a long time, and credit to you and of course many others who must have been involved in the journey.
Well,
Astrid.
this could not have happened without the support of the executive team, right?
Yeah,
And the executive was there all the way. They were champions of this idea, and that's what made this execution of the strategy so easy. We
yeah,
had buy-in from the get-go. That's what you need. You can't start something like this where it is considered just an appendix to the rest of the organization. It has to be commitment, it has to be unified across stakeholders and the executive, and then it has to be supported throughout the implementation phase. So I was lucky to have been put in this situation where I participated from day one and I saw the center flourish and grow, and I saw people develop and earn the right to advance their careers globally in P&L
yeah.
roles, etc.
It actually is encouraging us to go to the second last section, which is about strategy. But just before I come to that, we spoke about the psychological complexity of the paradoxical leadership. We talked about what it takes to build enduring institutions, that lending itself to how does one think about building capability at scale, the importance of talent and people along the way. And then, of course, we've spoken a bit about the whole leadership, the importance of leadership and having the right leaders on top. That takes us to another topic that I want to take your views, thoughts on is first, like strategy. Astrid, again, in the current business environment where changes are really rapid, quicker than ever before. As an approach, one thinks about strategy for a engineering or industrial or manufacturing setup, irrespective of geo. How should one approach it? And yeah,
It's not easy, but that's why leaders get paid the big bucks, right? Great
yeah,
leaders don't just paint a bold vision and set an ambitious goal for the future. They also lay out a solid and well thought out strategy to make that vision a reality. And then we talked about the day to day adjustments that you need to do. And to make these big plans work, leaders need to build trust, respect, and unity amongst their top team members across the globe. And they must create this safe environment where fresh ideas and innovational thinking hits their desk. Because in the end, creative thinking needs
mm,
to be more explored. And if you have more people that feel safe in an environment they operate in, they will bring ideas to you as a leader. You know,
right,
it all depends on the leadership style. If the leadership style is more through fear, people will shut down. They won't bring these ideas. And in order to create a sustainable business long term, you want ideas to hit your desk. You want more creativity. You want more innovation. You want to explore different business models. Give them a try. They might not work, but without trying, you will never know if a new business model has a potential or not. And
Right.
the real opportunity lies in companies that can successfully carry a strategy through execution. I mentioned that earlier. The deployment is one thing, but the execution is something else. You have to stay on it. If the strategy is 5 years, you stay on it for, year one, year two, year three, and see what works, what doesn't work, what we need to change. Yeah, leaders who can seamlessly move between strategic thinking and execution are the ones who can transform organization into huge, huge powerhouses of competitive natures.
There's also this lens of, previously, I guess it was okay to have one central strategy and go for, deep execution of it. But we're also starting to see that with work getting distributed in the nature it gets distributed today through, let's say, these structural innovations that has happened. You don't necessarily need to outsource. You can actually insource a lot of that work. There's actually a huge wave of insourcing that's going on that we notice here in this region. There's also the global strategy, but flexibility that is needed for the local strategies to have the freedom for it to be, implemented, executed. It drives also the sense of belongingness. The whole thing is actually deeply interconnected, isn't it? Because if that leads to empowerment, and lack of empowerment, if you're doing something which is very, very value critical, it leads to very low retention rates. So the whole thing is actually very, very interconnected.
Totally. The world is different now than what it was in the 80s and the 90s and even in the early 2000s, where I speak from the engineering side because I've had this experience in India through engineering. One design fits all regions.
Right.
That's not the case anymore. And you have to build a strategy that allows regional or local adaptations. And with that comes localization, the word of
Mm.
localization, not just centralization. There is a need for centralization, but there's also a big need for decentralization, empowerment, and localization of talent, of designs, of production, of supply chain, you name it. Because we've
Mm.
seen what happened over the last 5, 6, 7 years in terms of supply chain disruptions. During COVID, we've seen it when wars are waging in different regions of the world and you can't get products from point A to point B. So the pendulum has swung now back to more regionalization, more localization, understanding the needs on the ground rather than develop a strategy somewhere central, somewhere around the world that fits the needs of a region. That is no longer as attractive anymore.
Yeah, and look at how quickly things can change. I mean, yeah, the last 4, 6 weeks of development of global trade, or what it can do to trade as a percentage of global GDP. We'll wait to see how this whole thing unfolds, the impact on supply chain that it obviously would have, and all of this happened relatively quickly in very quick time.
Look, I'm a big believer in localization. I'm a big believer in free trade. And what I'm witnessing right now is concerning to a large degree because it just going to hit consumers more. It's really a tax impact. But I don't want to talk about politics necessarily on this call, but I can only imagine what business leaders are going through right now. They're mapping out their supply chain, they're mapping out where every single nut and bolt is
Yeah.
coming from to
Yeah.
see how can I avoid some of these tariffs, right, that may hit my products. But in the end, business leaders will have to make the decision to price up and or to change their production sites or change their designs, you name it.
Yeah.
It's a very volatile and uncertain time right now for a lot of business leaders. I don't envy them right now. They, they have
Yeah, no, it's
agility is very critical for them right now. Map it out and then be very quick in responding to how you want to position yourself.
yeah, it's the again going back to the same framework that we started this conversation, paradox of or the yin and the yang that you talk about of the long term versus the short term agility that one requires to survive through these disruptions. That takes me to one last section, Astrid, with you. Actually, one of my favorite sections. So, I've always tried to check with leaders that more recently, is there anything that there a approach or a strategy that you believed for a very long time in your corporate journey that off late you've actually changed and you've changed your perspective or changed your approach? If there is one such, could you just share?
Yes, well, decentralization, I think this whole topic about localization is, I think, what wins the game today. The needs in Europe versus Latin America or the Middle East or India or China or Southeast Asia or the US are different. And you have to have feet on the ground, be very alert about the customer needs, and then adapt to it. I think the idea of the pendulum is swinging now towards more regionalization, more localization is a reality. And I think that's what's going to win the day.
Mm,
You know, the time when you had mega sites or mega facilities and they fed the need of the world, I think those are over.
yeah, and I think the other advantage of that approach is these satellite operations are it's easier to move, pivot to a slightly different strategy, slightly different approach. It becomes easier. The larger it becomes, the more difficult it gets to make a change. Yeah. So the other thing is, what's a favorite book or a podcast that
Oh,
uh, you have uh, recently come across? Why and something that you would recommend to our listeners?
I am an avid reader. I have several that have really touched my being in so many different ways.
And if
Well,
you have more than one, please talk
yeah,
about
let
more
me
than
give
one.
you just a couple that have really made an impact on me personally. The one
Yeah.
was Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu's book, the Book of Joy. The Book of Joy
Mm,
is just reinforcing the importance of compassion and empathy, right, in the world, which we need more of. So
mm,
that was just a fun book to read and see how two world leaders think about this topic. That was one. I really enjoyed another book by John Meacham called The Soul of America. And it goes all the way back to George Washington and how leadership is being done, leadership through hope or leadership through fear. And it explains the entire journey of the United States, which was just incredibly fascinating to get through and understand. Most recently, I read The Anxious Generation, which gave me insights into what Gen Z, I think, has
yeah.
been
Yeah.
dealing with. I think is the Gen Z generation, and it
Right.
was really, really scary because the book was highlighting some statistics of what these young kids are going through in this new environment of social media. A very scary book, and I would encourage every parent to read this book
Yeah, could
because
you repeat that? What did you say?
it's called
The anxious generation?
Anxious Generation. I don't remember exactly the name of the author, but I'm sure you can Google it and find it.
Yeah,
The Anxious
sure.
Generation it just gave me pause
Mm,
because my generation, I'm a baby boomer, my generation is so remote from what this Gen Z is doing and what they're dealing with. And so it was an eye opener for me. And one that I'm reading right now, which is another fascinating book, is Let me see if I remember. It's The Prisoners of Geography. And
Interesting.
it is a book about describing each region of the world and how geopolitics, how regional leaders think about their specific region in terms of geography and geopolitics. It's really fascinating. I still have a couple of chapters left in the book to read, but I learned a lot about the thinking around, how Turkey or how Russia or how Mexico or how, Colombia or those kinds of countries around the world think about their future and their neighbors and how to protect themselves and how to position themselves to be more competitive. It was fascinating. I'm not done with the book yet, but that's the one that I'm reading at this stage.
What timing, as you say that more and more, countries are like the whole approach to, or rather a nationalistic approach or the localization of stuff. And then you talk about a book which goes by the topic of prisoners of geography. I'll definitely pick that up,
Yes,
Astrid.
please
Yeah.
do. And I have one holding in the library called The Defining Decade. I hear it's a great book again. It gives insights into the current generation and that are a little bit older, probably need to learn about these challenges and see how we can help.
It's been a fascinating conversation. One last question, Astrid, that any leader, and your final words of advice for, let's say, a leader either in the US or specifically in, let's say, Nordics, or I'm taking your Danfoss Eaton as an example, looking at scaling up in various different geographies, different structures that are coming up. One last but most important piece of advice from your side to them after you having built, such fascinating operations.
Seize the opportunity in India, I would say, and you won't regret it. Be
Mm,
be authentic, genuine, and lead with compassion and empathy. Those are things that I think leadership needs more of, and hope always wins over fear. But if I had to sum it all up, I would do the center again and again and again because I've seen the benefits and I've
right.
enjoyed the journey throughout my entire career since 2004.
Wow, that's powerful, Astrid, and coming from you after having built what you've built. Thank you so very much for giving us the time today, Astrid. Deeply appreciate your time, your thoughts, your recommendations, and sharing your experience with us at People Equation and the Leadership Equation podcast, particularly. Thanks a ton, Astrid.
My
Talk to you soon
pleasure.
again.
My pleasure. Thanks for the invitation. And it was delightful talking to you about this topic. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Astrid.